The deck still vibrated from the impact, the air biting with the acrid sting of severed wiring. Elias hadn't thought. Logic dictates distance. Human instinct demands collision. He had thrown his entire weight against the Empress, pinning Kalen to the floor beneath the tactical console, just as the primary support beam crashed through the space she had occupied a second before. His combat armor ground against her ceremonial plating. The heat of her skin radiated through the gaps in his suit. A broken protocol, an unbroken gaze. She stared up at him, her chest rising sharply, her pulse erratic against the wrist he had used to brace her fall. It turned out, in the court of the Empress, insubordination is just a prelude. 6 months earlier, Captain Elias Thorne had stood on this very dreadnought, his wrist bound by energy restraints. And he had formally admitted to bypassing rigid Valian military protocols, slicing into their comms to broadcast an unauthorized warning to an oblivious human patrol ship. He broke their laws to save human lives. By all Valian metrics, he should have been executed. But Empress Kalen had simply watched him from her elevated seat. Her eyes, deep and unreadable, tracked the stubborn set of his jaw. She didn't issue a death sentence. Instead, she handed down a light 30 days of confinement and initiated something entirely unprecedented. Private, recurring tactical consultations. She broke her rules to keep him. Those sessions were meant to be analytical. Kalen wanted to dissect human unpredictability, to understand how his species turned chaos into a tactical advantage. But the grand strategy quickly gave way to quiet proximity. The soft hum of the celestial mandate became the soundtrack to hours spent leaning over the same projection tables. Elias learned the exact minute tightening of her mouth when she was frustrated. She learned the cadence of his voice when he was holding back a joke. She was also fiercely direct. During their third week, Kalen plainly stated her romantic interest in him. She didn't dress it up in poetry. She simply presented it as a fact, immediately followed by the acknowledgement of his long-distance relationship with Major Elena Rostova on Mars. It was an established boundary. Kalen respected it, but the boundary was already fracturing. The isolation of command was a heavy burden for the Empress, and Elias found himself wanting to carry it for her. Meanwhile, his connection with Elena was bleeding out in slow, delayed transmissions. And the messages from Mars felt like they were written by a stranger. Truth is, the contrast was suffocating. Elena's text dispatches were full of complaints about planetary weather and bureaucratic delays. But with Kalen, there was the electric spark of skin accidentally meeting metal when they adjusted the same star chart. There was the heavy, unspoken trust created when he corrected her fleet maneuvers and she actually listened. He was supposed to be a human prisoner offering tactical insight. Instead, he was becoming the only person on the dreadnought who didn't treat her like a god. He was holding on to a ghost on Mars, while flesh and blood, and a terrifying, compelling gravity stood right in front of him every single day. Now, on the ruined bridge, the sirens wailed. Elias slowly pushed himself up. Oh, his muscles burning from the strain of holding back the collapsed debris. He checked her for wounds, his hands hovering just inches from her face. She wasn't looking at the destruction around them. She was looking at the way his hand trembled. The emergency bulkhead sealed with a heavy thud, cutting off the wail of the sirens. They had survived the ambush, but the moment his armor stopped grinding against hers, Elias felt the absence of her warmth like a physical blow. That terrified him more than the attack itself. 3 hours later, he sat in his quarters, the taste of recycled air sharp in his mouth. He typed out the official paperwork to transfer off the dreadnought. He told himself it was the right thing to do. He needed to salvage what was left with Elena. He needed to escape the gravity Kalen exerted on his chest every time she looked at him. He hit submit, waiting for the relief to wash over him. It never came. It took exactly 4 minutes for his door to slide open. Kalen stood in the threshold. She hadn't even changed out of her scuffed ceremonial plating. She held a data pad in one hand, the screen displaying his transfer request. She didn't yell. She didn't demand explanations. She simply stepped into his room, closed the door, and dropped the pad onto his desk. Request denied. She stepped into his space close enough that he could feel the ambient heat of her skin. She told him to stop running. Human instinct had driven him to protect her on the bridge, but human fear was driving him to flee. She demanded he confront the dead signal to Mars instead of abandoning the only command where he truly belonged. Duty and established relationships were one thing, but denying undeniable compatibility was a tactical failure. She didn't ask him to stay for her. She demanded he stop lying to himself, and she was right. Elias stared at the bulkhead for a long time after she left. The stinging behind his eyes wasn't from the smoke on the bridge. It was the sudden, overwhelming relief of letting go. He sat back down at the console. The message to Mars was brief. It was final. He formally terminated the relationship with Elena, severing a tether that had frayed to nothing months ago. He didn't wait for a reply. He walked straight to the Empress's private quarters. When the doors parted, the heavy space between them finally collapsed. He didn't offer a grand speech. He just stepped close, his hand finding the curve of her jaw, his thumb brushing against the cool edge of her plating. He told her the transfer was permanently rescinded. He was available. He was staying. The breath she let out shuddered against his collarbone. They didn't hide. Interspecies politics were brittle, but hiding would have been a weakness neither of them could afford. They publicly broadcasted their partnership to both the Velian High Command and the human military tribunals. The backlash was immediate. Admirals and high counselors demanded inquiries, citing compromised loyalties and diplomatic disaster. Elias and Kalen answered them with flawless execution. They maintained strict operational boundaries on the bridge, proving that cross-cultural synthesis was a devastating tactical advantage. A human instinct paired seamlessly with Velian logic, creating a joint command efficiency so absolute it neutralized any political argument against them. They won every engagement. They silenced every critic. A year later, Elias stood beneath the soft glow of the ship's ceremonial arches, looking into Kalen's dark eyes. The interspecies bonding ceremony was quiet, stripped of grand political theater. As she secured a ceremonial filament around his wrist, mirroring the one on hers, Elias felt the familiar electric spark of skin meeting metal. The burden of duty remained, but the isolation of command was gone forever. He had broken their laws and she had broken her rules. Now they made their own.